This is a walkthrough of how to hedge with currency options. The use of currency options to hedge transaction exposure is fairly common. Let's say we're a US company who just booked an order from a British client who is going to pay us in 2 months. Our exposure is there because we don't know what the British pound is going to be worth in terms of dollars at the end of 2 months. If the spot rate today were 1.27 US dollars per British pound, and if we knew that the spot exchange rate was going to stay constant over the next 2 months, then we know what these British pounds would be worth in terms of dollars then. At that time, the 800,000 pounds would be worth, in terms of dollars, $1.016 million. The problem with this is that the pound isn't constant. The pound is a floating currency, the British pound. So in reality, we really don't know what we're going to receive when our client finally pays us. However, if we use an option to hedge this uncertainty, we can at least be sure that this 800,000 pounds translates to a minimum amount, possibly more, in 2 months. That's because the unique feature of currency hedging with options is that we cap our downside risk. That is, we set a limit on how much we could lose, or a minimum amount we're going to receive when we translate to that currency. But we also preserve our upside. We preserve a chance of getting paid in a stronger currency, and therefore translating to a larger amount of US dollars at the end of the accounts receivable. This upside is a unique feature of only options. And as a result of this potential upside, another unique feature of options is their cost. That is the option premium. In addition to the premium, we'll also have the maturity of the option, as well as the strike price. For our $800,000 pound accounts receivable that we're going to receive in 2 months, we'll want to make sure that the maturity of the option, that is how long it's good for until it expires, is the same date as the accounts receivable. In this example, 2 months, or at least as close as we can get to 2 months. And let's say our premium, at least an annualized premium, is 3.25%. That then just leaves us with our strike price. That is the underlying rate that we can convert this currency option into actual currency. In our example here, we suppose that today's spot exchange rate was $1.27 per pound. And so while it's not required, let's start this example in which we buy a option that has a strike price that's currently equal to the current spot rate, 1.27 US dollars per British pound. Then if this is the amount that we need to hedge, the 800,000 pounds, then if we want to hedge perfectly, this should be the amount of options that we actually purchase. So our notional is that 800,000 pounds. And to calculate the cost of this option then, we'll take that notional amount, multiplied by the annualized premium, but de-annualized to reflect the cost, or reflect the fact that this option is not for a year, but for some maturity less than a year. And since this notional amount is in British pounds, the last thing that we're going to need in order to estimate the cost of this option is the strike price in US dollars. That's the general formula to calculate the cost of the option, and since we have each of these here, we can calculate the option cost for this example hedge. The notional in British pounds, the annualized premium or interest rate cost on this option for the year, the 3.25%, but then de-annualized, since this is only a 2-month option, that is only 60 days out of the 360 days in a banker's year, and the strike price in US dollars, which is given to us, $1.27 per British pound. Simplifying this annualization factor here, and multiplying the three terms together, we get a total cost for the option of $5,503. That's a premium, or cost, of this option. So let's recap what we know now so we can see how this hedge works under different scenarios in the future spot exchange rate. First, we've calculated the cost of the option based on the option characteristics that we have. We know that the point of this is to hedge an accounts receivable that we're going to receive in 2 months in pounds, in a foreign currency. And if the spot rate today remained constant over the next 2 months, then we wouldn't have to worry about hedging at all, because we would know exactly what we would get after 2 months. But in reality, that future spot rate could be anything. And let's then calculate, we pay $5,500 to put on this hedge, but let's calculate the benefit if the spot rate does change. Remember that the unique benefit of hedging with a currency option is that we can cap our downside risk, just like any hedge that we've seen so far, like a futures contract hedge. But the unique difference is that we preserve our upside. And the benefit of getting the upside comes with the additional cost of paying this premium we just calculated. So let's say the dollar strengthens. It goes from $1.27 to $1.2. Strengthened because the British pound now buys fewer US dollars. That's a problem for us here because we're getting paid £800,000 in 2 months, and instead of £800,000 being worth $1.016 million in revenue, those pounds are worth $960,000 in revenue. And if we had remained unhedged, we would have lost the equivalent of $56,000 in revenue as a result. But let's take a look at how that loss compares to what's going on with our option contract if we did use an option to hedge. For our option, our notional was still £800,000, and we selected a strike price that was the same as the spot price at the time that we initially booked this accounts receivable and that we initially put on this options hedge. And importantly, the risk that we faced in this accounts receivable is the risk of receiving a weaker pound, that our pounds would translate into fewer US dollars. And so we need to buy an option that performs well when the pound weakens. That means we need to buy a put option on the pound. And the way it will work for us here is that the profit on that put option will be the maximum of either 0, that is, we walk away if the put option is not profitable, or the difference between the strike price and the spot price at some particular time after this option is bought. For us, we care about the spot price at the end of 2 months, when our accounts receivable matures. And for us, this put option, the strike price was $1.27 per pound. But in this example, we saw that, well, our hypothetical example was that the new spot rate went to $1.2 per pound. And so if the spot does fall to $1.2 per pound, then the put option profit is either 7 cents or 0, and in this case, the maximum of this is the 7 cents. We would take the 7 cents. We wouldn't walk away from this option when it's clearly profitable. So this is the individual profit on put option for a single currency unit. But here, we purchased 800,000 pounds of exposure. And so the total profit, the gross profit, for this particular option is that 800,000 pounds times this unit profit of 7 cents per option, for a total profit, $56,000. And here is the key thing where we can see this option working as we expected. Here we made $56,000 on this option position, and that amount was just enough to cover this $56,000 loss on the value of the accounts receivable. And so the net benefit, if you include the underlying accounts receivable and the option performance together, the net benefit is as if like nothing happened, as if the 1.27 exchange rate didn't change at all. We still get, because the loss on this minus 56,000 and the gain on this option contract is plus 56,000, we still effectively receive this 1.016 million. And so with an options contract, we've locked in an exchange rate, and we've eliminated any risk associated with exchange rate fluctuation. And this should be just like a forward contract, the profit of a forward contract. That is, if you remember the calculations of a forward contract, it kind of worked in the same way. The difference, though, that is not in a forward contract, but that is here with the option, is the premium that we paid to buy this option. It's actually very expensive to buy an option. For a forward contract, this might have cost us like $5, but here it's costing us $5,503 to buy this option. So why would we pay that extra expense? And the answer is that of what happens if the pound doesn't weaken, but instead strengthens. Because with a forward contract, you are still going to get the same amount at the end of the day. At the end of this accounts receivable, you'll know exactly what you're going to receive. But with the option, since you pay a premium to get into this option, you have the possibility to receive more than what you might expect if the exchange rate goes the other way. So let's take a look at how that would happen. In particular, since we'll keep everything the same, 1.27 is the current exchange rate, and so therefore we buy a put option with the strike price of 1.27 as well. The difference is calculating the payoff of this option and how it's going to work as a hedge. If the exchange rate moves not to 1.20, but to something like, let's say, 1.35. If that happens, that means the dollar weakened. And since you're getting paid in pounds, that means those pounds at the end of the accounts receivable are going to translate to a larger amount of dollars. In this case, they'll translate to $1.08 million under this exchange rate where the pound is more valuable. So here, if you had remained unhedged and the exchange rate worked out in your favor, you are up an extra $64,000 when you collect on this accounts receivable. And with a futures contract, you wouldn't have been able to enjoy that. You would have locked in an exchange rate of 1.27. But if we revisit the payoff profile for a put option, what we get is a maximum of either 0 or the difference between the strike and the spot. For us, the strike was 1.27 and the spot ended up at 1.35. We locked in the right to sell pounds at a rate of 1.27, but at the end, they sold for 1.35. So in this case, this option turns out not to be profitable. A put option bet here that the pound would weaken, and instead it strengthened by 8 cents, $8.08 per pound. But the definition of a put option is that we take the maximum of either 0 or the payoff of this option. And in this case, since the payoff of this option is negative 8 cents, the larger number, the maximum of these two terms, is actually going to be 0. And what this means is that we walk away from this option. With a futures contract, you can't do that. You can't just get out of the contract like that without experiencing a loss. But with a option, you cap your loss at the cost of the premium. When you walk away, you don't have to experience the loss on the actual position. You just experience the loss of the premium itself. And that's actually a kind of nice advantage, because if you recall that the notional here was 800,000 pounds, then an 8-penny loss, but on 800,000, is a $64,000 loss that you get to walk away from. That's much more preferable. That is, if you gave me a choice of walking away and avoiding this loss and having to experience this loss as a consequence, it's clear that you would definitely do that. And the important thing then is to compare this gain on the accounts receivable to the effective loss that you had on this option hedge. Your 800,000 pounds with a per unit option loss, not of the difference between what the strike and spot ended up at, that 7 cents, 8 cents, sorry, but instead 0, walking away completely. And instead, the only thing that you lose out on is the premium here of $5,503. And so if you consider the gain on the accounts receivable and the minor loss on the put option, these two together mean that you actually end up with an additional $58,000. So you get your initial locked exchange rate, producing 1.016 million, plus the additional 58,000. It's not quite as good in this case as remaining completely unhedged, receiving this 1.08 million, but it's still allowing you to enjoy a lot of the upside when the pound actually strengthens to a more valuable exchange rate. So in summary, if your exchange rate moves adversely, that is, the pound weakens from 1.27 to that 1.20 that we saw, with an option contract, we're still locked in. We're still going to receive the same amount that we were expecting to get at the beginning of this contract. But if the pound strengthens instead, such that the accounts receivable suddenly becomes worth more in US dollar terms, the benefit of being able to walk away from this put option means that we can preserve the upside of that accounts receivable, or at least a good chunk of it. And that's a situation that we couldn't have done if we had hedged instead with a forward contract. The cost of entering into this additional benefit is the cost of the premium.